Welcome to the Prescott Lab podcast, not just theory, practical science for everyone. Gentlemen, let me ask you something most men over 60 never dare put into words. What happens when you relieve yourself every single day? Some whisper it weakens the body, others swear it keeps the system alive. Who's right? Here's the truth, both are. And it all depends on balance, on rhythm, and on how your prostate responds. I'm Dr. Jonathan Prescott, a physician and integrative medicine researcher who has spent more than 3 decades sitting across from men just like you, men in their 60s and 70s who quietly wondered if this private act was stealing their strength or secretly protecting it. Too many stayed silent until it was too late. That's why today we break the silence. Because your prostate, though no larger than a walnut, carries the weight of your freedom, your sleep, even your dignity. When it thrives, you thrive. When it swells or falters, it chips away not only at your health, but at your confidence as a man. And before we dive deeper, let me pause for just a moment. If this conversation already resonates, hit that like button. Not because I need the number, but because every single like tells the algorithm that men's health matters, that your story deserves to be heard. And I promise you this, the men who tap like will feel the difference. Because engagement here means the message spreads wider, reaching the very men who need it most. Now, let's begin at the foundation, the prostate itself. A small gland, yes, but one with an outsized impact on how you live every single day. Gentlemen, let's strip away the mystery. The prostate, no bigger than a walnut, sitting just below the bladder, quietly decides how you live your days and how you sleep your nights. When it's healthy, you barely notice it exists, but when it swells or stiffens, life changes. Suddenly, the bathroom calls you 3, 4, even 5 times at night. Suddenly, intimacy feels more like pressure than pleasure. I've sat across from men in their 60s who told me, "Doc, I never thought about my prostate in my 40s, it just wasn't on the radar." But then somewhere past 60, it demanded all their attention, not with kindness, but with urgency, discomfort, and that heavy dread that something inside is slipping out of their control. And here's the truth most men miss. The prostate doesn't just influence urination or sexuality. It influences your independence, your confidence, your dignity. When the gland is supple, blood flows. Muscles respond and life feels lighter. But when it becomes inflamed or congested, it doesn't just block your urine, it blocks your freedom. Let me ask you something and answer honestly in the comments. Have you ever woken up more than twice a night just to pee? Type 1 if that's you. Type 0 if you're one of the lucky few still sleeping straight through. I read every response, and your answer could help another man realize he's not alone. This, gentlemen, is why the prostate is not a silent passenger. It reacts to everything, to your diet, to your hormones, and yes, even to how often you relieve yourself. Ignore it, and it will remind you in the harshest ways. Respect it, and it will quietly reward you with comfort, intimacy, and dignity. And once you understand how much power this tiny gland truly has, the next piece of the puzzle suddenly makes sense. Why every single release resets your hormones in ways that can either protect you or slowly drain your vitality. Gentlemen, now that you understand just how much weight that walnut-sized gland carries, let's look at what happens every time you release. With each ejaculation, a subtle but powerful shift ripples through your body. Most men never feel it directly, but its effects accumulate over years. At the center is a hormone called DHT, dihydrotestosterone. DHT is both a builder and a destroyer. It carved your masculine frame, your voice, your drive. But when it lingers too high, it becomes the fuel that makes your prostate enlarge, pressing on your bladder, stealing your sleep, and turning your nights restless. The fascinating part, every time you release, DHT takes a brief dip, almost like your prostate being given a timeout, a chance to breathe again. For many men, this pause protects the gland, slows growth, and restores a fragile balance. I've had patients tell me, "Doctor, I don't know why, but afterward I feel lighter, calmer, clearer." And that's not imagination, it's chemistry. Testosterone and DHT shifting into harmony, cortisol dropping, the nervous system loosening its grip. For a moment, the body feels aligned again. But here's the catch. Too little release leaves the gland stagnant, swelling quietly in neglect. Too much every single day without pause unsettles the entire endocrine rhythm. Instead of strength, you feel drained. Instead of clarity, you feel fog. The very act that once restored balance now tips it off course. So the question isn't whether the act is good or bad, that's the wrong lens. The real key is balance. Just as your muscles need both exercise and recovery, so too does your prostate. Push it endlessly and it falters. Ignore it completely and it stiffens, congests, and begins to rebel. And here is where things become even more surprising. Because release is not just hormonal, it is physical. Each climax sends rhythmic waves of contraction through the pelvic floor, pulling blood into places that need it most, almost like a secret workout hidden deep inside the body. This is the reason many men describe feeling looser, lighter, more at ease afterward. It's not just in their heads. It's circulation, it's muscle, it's biology. This is what we call muscle contractions and circulation. The pelvic workout, a truth about the male body that too many overlook, yet it may be one of the most protective forces for your prostate as you age. Gentlemen, what many overlook is that release isn't just about chemistry. It isn't just hormones shifting in silence. It is also a physical event, a workout hidden deep within the pelvis. Each time a man climaxes, the muscles of the pelvic floor spring to life in powerful, rhythmic waves. The prostate itself joins in, contracting in unison like a small engine pumping to keep itself alive. These contractions are not random spasms. They are purposeful movements, like the squeezing of a heart muscle or the slow, deliberate tightening of a fist. In those moments, blood is drawn into tissues that might otherwise sit stagnant, oxygen is delivered, and nutrients flow where they are needed most. Think of it this way. Imagine a small pond with no fresh water moving in. Over time, it grows cloudy, still, and heavy. But if you stir it, if you let fresh water in, the pond clears, life returns. That's what these contractions do for your prostate. They stir what would otherwise grow stale. They keep the tissue supple, elastic, and alive. I've had patients in their 70s tell me, "Doctor, I don't know why, but after release I feel a loosening as if the weight in my pelvis is lighter." What they are describing is the circulation, the gentle massage of their own muscles, sweeping away congestion that age and stillness would otherwise let settle. And here's the profound truth. At a time in life when blood flow naturally slows, when vessels stiffen, and when vitality seems harder to summon, this built-in workout becomes one of the last natural gifts your body still offers. A gift far too many men ignore, dismiss, or shame themselves into abandoning. And there is always a but. Just like any other workout, too much becomes injury. If you force those muscles into daily, relentless contraction without rest, fatigue sets in. That fatigue may not scream at you with sharp pain, but it whispers. A weaker stream when you urinate, a subtle leak when you cough or laugh, a dull, constant tension in the groin that never seems to let go. Signs not of strength but of overuse. The prostate thrives on movement, but it also depends on rhythm. Think of a runner. Training every day without pause doesn't build endurance, it breaks it down. The same principle applies here. Release in balance keeps the gland active and alive. Release without balance leaves the very muscles meant to protect you exhausted. So the question isn't whether the act is natural, it is. The question is whether you allow it to remain restorative rather than depleting. And that's why the next layer of this story is so important. Because beyond hormones, beyond muscles, beyond blood flow, the prostate carries its own immune defenses. And every release doesn't just move blood, it stirs those defenses, clearing waste, lowering irritation, and reducing the silent inflammation that robs men of comfort year after year. This, gentlemen, is what I call immunity and inflammation. Nature's cleanse, the quiet housekeeping process most doctors overlook, but one your body performs faithfully if only you allow it. Gentlemen, here's something most men don't realize: your prostate is not just a simple fluid factory. It is also home to its own immune defenses. Buried deep inside this small gland is a miniature army, constantly watching, clearing, and protecting. And every single release you experience is not just an act of relief, it is a signal for that army to wake up and get to work. Think of what happens inside. Over time, old cells accumulate. Proteins drift without purpose, and metabolic waste settles like dust in an attic. You don't see it, you don't feel it directly. But that buildup quietly irritates the gland. Release acts like opening the windows of that attic, letting fresh air in, sweeping the dust out. It's a cleanse, nature's way of housekeeping. I've had older men tell me that after months without intimacy or release, they developed a dull heaviness in the pelvis, a sense of weight they couldn't explain. Some even described it like carrying a stone inside. And yet, when they returned to a healthy rhythm once or twice a week, the heaviness lifted. Their words were simple: "Doc, I feel lighter, easier, like something inside finally let go." What they were describing was the prostate's immune system doing its job, flushing out what didn't belong, lowering the low-grade inflammation that makes life quietly miserable. But here's the caution. Just as with hormones and muscles, balance matters. If you force the body into constant cycles without pause, those immune defenses can grow unstable. Instead of cleansing, they begin to overreact. Instead of protecting, they irritate. And what results is not relief, but a chronic, smoldering inflammation, invisible on scans, difficult to detect on tests, but real enough to rob men of comfort every single day. Let me give you an image. Imagine a neighborhood fire brigade. If they are called once in a while, they protect the town, put out the flames, and everyone feels safe. But if alarms ring every single night, even without real fires, the firefighters grow restless, agitated, and soon they start tearing down doors that don't need breaking. That's what happens when the prostate's immune defenses are pushed too often. A system built to protect begins to cause damage. And yet, when balanced, this natural cleanse is one of the most overlooked blessings of male biology. It lowers irritation, improves comfort, and prevents the gland from becoming a source of silent misery. This is why release in rhythm is not just about pleasure. It is about maintenance. It is about prevention. And now, to bring this lesson to life, let me share a real story. Because charts and hormones can explain the science, but it is in the voice of a man who lived it that the truth becomes unforgettable. I will never forget David, 65 years old, a construction supervisor from Nevada, who walked into my office with more embarrassment than pain, but whose story would prove exactly how powerful or how dangerous silence can be. I still remember the afternoon David walked into my office. He was 65, a retired construction supervisor from Nevada. His skin carried the sun of decades spent outdoors, but his eyes told another story: exhaustion, hesitation, and a quiet embarrassment that weighed heavier than any brick he had ever lifted. He sat down slowly, shifting in the chair as though something deep inside was pressing against him. "Doc," he said, his voice low, "I don't really talk about this stuff, but I can't keep going like this." What came next was a confession that many men his age carry in silence. For nearly a decade, David had shut down all sexual activity, not because his body couldn't respond, but because he believed, like so many men past 55, that intimacy no longer mattered. He told himself it was undignified, that it was something to leave behind with youth. And with that belief, he closed the door on release altogether. At first, he thought nothing of it. He poured his time into work, into caring for his family, into the quiet routines of daily life. But the years weren't kind. Slowly, he noticed changes. He woke up 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a night just to urinate. His bladder never felt empty. A dull heaviness settled in his lower abdomen like carrying a weight no one else could see. And worse, an unspoken sense of unease haunted him as though something deep inside his body wasn't right. When we ran the tests, the results mirrored his story. His prostate was enlarged. His PSA levels were elevated just above the safe range. On the scans, the gland looked swollen, irritated, not dangerous yet, but a clear message that years of silence had consequences. David stared at the numbers on the page, then at me. "So what now?" he asked. He expected a pill, a surgery, some external solution to a problem he thought was too private to speak about. What I told him surprised him more than the diagnosis itself. "David," I said gently, "part of your healing isn't going to come from a pharmacy. It's going to come from your own body, from reintroducing a rhythm you abandoned once or twice a week. That's all. Give your prostate movement again. Give it circulation, release, balance. Pair it with more water, some walking, and a few nutrients your gland is craving. You don't need to be young again. You just need to stop treating yourself as if life is already over." He looked at me for a long moment, his jaw tight, his pride wrestling with vulnerability. "At my age," he whispered. I nodded. "Especially at your age." The first months weren't easy. He admitted it felt awkward, even shameful at first, to rekindle a habit he had buried under years of silence. But slowly something changed. His body responded. His nights grew quieter. The heaviness in his pelvis eased. After 4 months, his PSA levels dropped. His prostate swelling reduced, and most importantly, his confidence returned. One afternoon, he came back to my office, his face carrying a spark I hadn't seen before. "Doc," he said with a grin, "I feel like myself again, lighter, stronger, more alive." He paused, his voice softening. I didn't realize how much I had given up until I got it back. That, gentlemen, is why I tell you, silence is the true enemy. David's story isn't rare. It's the quiet tragedy of countless men who mistake aging for surrender. But it's also a story of hope. Because even after years of neglect, balance can be restored. The body remembers how to heal if only you give it the chance. And this brings us to the question every man asks sooner or later, the very one David whispered after his recovery. "Doctor, how often should I do this to stay healthy without going too far?" After David's story, this is the question that always follows. "Doctor, how often is enough? How much is too much?" The truth is, there is no single perfect number carved in stone. Every man's body carries its own rhythm. But after 3 decades of sitting with men in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even into their 80s, I've seen patterns, and these patterns can guide you like a compass. For men in their 40s, energy and recovery are still strong. 3 to 4 times a week usually causes no harm. In fact, for many, it helps keep hormones balanced and circulation active. The body at that age is resilient, able to bounce back quickly. By the 50s, things shift. Energy isn't limitless anymore, and hormones begin to change. For most, 2 to 3 times per week is a healthy rhythm, enough to maintain balance without tipping into fatigue. But for men in their 60s and beyond, the story changes again. At this stage, release once a week is often enough to keep the gland supple, the circulation flowing, and the chemistry balanced. Twice is still acceptable if desire remains strong, but daily repetition, especially back-to-back, can drain more than it restores. The key is not frequency for the sake of numbers, but listening to your body's quiet signals. Gentlemen, here's a simple rule I give my patients. If you finish and feel lighter, calmer, more alive, your rhythm is serving you. If you finish and feel drained, foggy, or burdened, your rhythm is stealing from you. This is why I remind men that consistency matters more than intensity. Just like exercise or diet, it's the pattern you maintain over years that protects you, not the excesses or the droughts. Too little activity and the prostate stagnates, growing heavy and irritated. Too much and the muscles fatigue, the hormones wobble, and the gland begins to rebel. And now let me turn this back to you, the men listening right now. Think honestly about your own rhythm. Do you lean toward neglect, leaving the gland without movement for weeks or months? Or do you lean toward overuse, mistaking constant release for health? Type your truth in the comments. If you think you may be overdoing it, type 1. If you think you've been neglecting it for too long, type 0. And if you've found your balance, share that too. You may be surprised how many other men silently wonder the same thing. And your comment could be the very thing that sets another man free. And yet, even when the science is clear and the guidance is simple, there remains one enemy greater than hormones, muscles, or aging. It's not physical at all. It's the heavy silence, the shame, the unspoken embarrassment that keeps men from asking, from acting, and from healing. This, gentlemen, is the emotional barrier few men talk about, and it may be the reason so many suffer longer than they need to. Gentlemen, I can sit here and explain hormones, circulation, and immunity all day long. But let me tell you something I've learned after decades of listening to men in my office. Biology isn't always the biggest barrier. Silence is. I see it in their eyes before they even speak. A hesitation, a wait, they don't know how to begin the conversation. Some laugh nervously, others look down at the floor, and then in a low voice they finally say, "Doctor, I've never talked about this with anyone before." Why? Because they were raised in a time when self-relief was whispered about with shame. They were taught it was childish, wrong, even dangerous. Many were told that after a certain age it had no place in a man's life, so they buried the subject under layers of embarrassment, convincing themselves their struggles were a punishment or a weakness, when in reality, the only damage came from ignoring their body's needs. I've had 70-year-old men whisper to me as if they were schoolboys confessing a sin. And when I tell them plainly, it's normal, it's healthy, it's part of protecting your prostate, I watch the tension fall from their shoulders. Their faces soften. Sometimes they even laugh, not because it's funny, but because the relief of being told the truth feels like freedom. Gentlemen, this silence is more destructive than you think. It delays care for years. It keeps men from asking the simplest of questions, even when their nights are sleepless and their days are heavy with discomfort. It leaves them suffering alone when the solution could have been simple all along. This is why I tell every patient, protecting your prostate is no different from protecting your heart or your lungs. You wouldn't ignore chest pain. You wouldn't brush off shortness of breath. So why do so many brush off urgency, weak flow, or pelvic heaviness just because it's tied to intimacy? Let me ask you directly, have you ever kept silent about something bothering you down there because you were too embarrassed to bring it up? If yes, type 1 in the comments. If no, type 0. You might think your answer doesn't matter, but it does. Every number is proof that you're not alone and that together we're breaking the silence. Because here's the ultimate truth, silence is not strength, it is surrender. And the only way to reclaim your strength, your freedom, and your dignity is to replace silence with awareness. Which leads us straight into the most important lesson of all. The ultimate takeaway every man needs to hear if he truly wants to protect his prostate and his independence in the years ahead. This is what I call awareness over silence. Gentlemen, after all these years of listening to stories, reading scans, and watching men wrestle with their fears, I've come to one simple conclusion. The greatest gift you can give yourself in later life is awareness. Your prostate is small, yes, barely the size of a walnut, but its impact is enormous. It decides whether you sleep peacefully through the night or pace the hallway again and again. It decides whether intimacy feels natural and effortless or whether it slips into frustration and embarrassment. It shapes not only your health but your confidence, your independence, and your dignity. Daily release done in balance is not just a habit, it's a tool. A tool that can regulate hormones, stir circulation, and activate the prostate's own immune defenses. But here is the heart of it. Too little activity leaves the gland stagnant, heavy, irritated. Too much without recovery leaves you drained, fatigued, and out of rhythm. It's not about chasing a number. It's about listening, truly listening to your body's quiet signals. And when you finally replace silence with awareness, something remarkable happens. I've seen it with my own eyes. Men walk taller, they breathe easier, they smile more readily. They stop carrying their private fears in isolation and begin living again with dignity. They realize that self-care is not selfish, that paying attention to the prostate is not shameful, it is essential. Just as caring for your heart keeps you alive, caring for your prostate keeps you free. Gentlemen, silence is the true enemy. Awareness is the weapon. And when you dare to ask, when you dare to learn, when you dare to act, you unlock the possibility of years lived not in fear, but in confidence. So here is my challenge to you. From this day forward, replace embarrassment with curiosity. Replace neglect with action. And replace silence with awareness. Because awareness is the bridge between weakness and strength, between decline and vitality, between surrender and freedom. And yet, before we close, there is one final message I want every man listening to carry with him. A conclusion that ties it all together and reminds you that caring for your prostate is not about youth. It's about protecting your freedom, your vitality, and your confidence for all the years ahead. And this is what I call caring for your prostate with confidence. Gentlemen, as we come to the end of this journey, let me draw the line clear and simple. Your prostate may be small, but it is no small matter. It shapes your nights, your days, your confidence, and your dignity as you age. We've seen the truth together. How each release resets hormones, lowering the fire of DHT. How contractions pump blood, keeping tissues alive and elastic. How your immune defenses use these moments to cleanse and protect. And how silence, more than biology, is the enemy that keeps men suffering longer than they need to. The lesson is not whether release is good or bad. That's far too shallow. The lesson is balance, awareness, courage, balance to respect the body's rhythm, awareness to hear its quiet warnings, courage to speak, to ask, to act without shame. I have seen men in their 60s rediscover their strength after years of neglect. I have seen men in their 70s sleep through the night again after finding their rhythm. And I have seen men in their 80s walk taller, freer, simply because they stopped hiding and started caring. So here is my final word. Your prostate deserves attention, not avoidance. Relief is not a guilty secret. It is a tool, one that can either weaken or strengthen depending on how wisely you use it. Caring for this gland is not about chasing youth. It is about preserving freedom. It is about protecting your vitality. It is about living with confidence at every stage of life. And as you move forward, remember this: the decisions you make today will shape the strength you carry tomorrow. If this conversation has spoken to you, I ask one simple thing. Hit that like button, not for me, but for you and for every man who needs to hear that his struggles are not shameful, they are human. Leave a comment, even just a 1 or a 0. Because every voice chips away at the silence that has bound men for too long. And subscribe so you never miss the next conversation that could change your life. Gentlemen, may your nights be peaceful, your mornings strong, and your years ahead lived with freedom and dignity.